Three children watched in horror as the tsunami engulfed their classmates behind them and caught up to them just as they reached the hill and began climbing to safety. Across town, a house collapsed on a 16-year-old and his grandmother. Trapped with no heat and freezing temperatures, the boy must keep himself and his grandmother from freezing until rescuers find them. This video covers two stories from the 2011 Tohoku earthquake and tsunami. I would like to begin this story with my own personal experience of March 11th, 2011. At 2:45 p.m., I was sitting at a desk preparing a lesson for an elementary school student. I was an English teacher at an English school in Kitami, Hokkaido, Japan. As I was looking through the elementary school book and preparing some games to play with the student, my chair began to roll slightly back and forth beneath me. Though I had never experienced an earthquake until I moved to Japan in 2008, and during that time had experienced many, until that day, all had been small and short and nothing to be alarmed about, so I continued my lesson prep. However, after about 10 seconds, the intensity had grown to become extremely worrying. I was now holding onto my desk to prevent the chair from rolling across the floor. I hopped up and jogged down the hall to the building entrance where the office assistant was crouched holding onto her desk with one hand and holding onto the wall behind her with the other. We ran outside into the street where many other people were waiting it out. The power lines oscillated back and forth in unison, and the ground felt solid, but was swaying like it was floating on top of an ocean. We stood outside in the snow while the earthquake continued for 4 minutes straight. When it finished, I went back inside just in time for my student to arrive. I taught the lesson for the next hour, running the 7-year-old out of the building for every aftershock. After the lesson was the first time that I actually got a chance to see what had happened. That's when I saw the coverage of the earthquake and the tsunami. At the same time that I was teaching this class, and approximately 400 miles to the south, 16-year-old Jin Abe and his 80-year-old grandmother Sumi heard sirens sounding and vans driving through the streets, warning of an approaching tsunami over the loudspeaker. Their home had survived the magnitude 9 earthquake, and now the Abes were cleaning up their kitchen and recovering from the earthquake. They were not particularly worried about the tsunami, as they were far inland and no tsunami had ever reached their home before. Furthermore, these warnings had happened before, only to be false alarms or small swells in the waves along the coast. The earthquake's epicenter was at the Japan Trench, a region where the Pacific Plate subducts under the Okhotsk Plate. As the plates move, pressure builds and builds until there is a break, causing movement of the ocean floor, resulting in an earthquake, and in this case, a devastating tsunami. The earthquake was a 20 to 26 foot upthrust on the Okhotsk side along 110 miles of the seabed, causing the largest earthquake in the recorded history of Japan and the 4th largest in the world. This upthrust caused a wave traveling through the ocean toward the eastern coast of Japan at nearly 500 miles per hour. In the deep waters of the Pacific Ocean, this tsunami causes a small but significant detectable wave at the surface where sensors are stationed specifically for the detection of these tsunamis. Shortly after the earthquake, these sensors did, in fact, detect the approaching tsunami and relayed the information to the Japanese Emergency Service. In towns across the coast, the news was broadcast on radios and television stating that a 6-meter tsunami was approaching and that everyone should immediately head to the nearest tsunami safe zone. However, this report was wrong. Historical data was used as a physical model in estimating the height and strength of the tsunami. However, as the earthquake was unprecedented, so was the tsunami. The result was a gross underestimate. The first report was that the tsunami was 6 meters. After further analysis, this report would be updated to 10 meters. However, this would be too late for some. As the wave came closer to shore, the shallower water added resistance to the speed of the wave. The tsunami slowed down, with the front of the wave reaching shallower waters first, and slowing before the back of the wave, causing the tsunami to slow down and become more compact and increasing in height. As the tsunami reached shore, many coastal residents were still in their homes or places of work. Like many times before, the sirens were sounding, indicating the approaching wave, and times before, the tsunami had been small or altogether a false alarm, so residents had grown to ignore the warnings. However, unlike the many times before, this tsunami was about to unleash devastation on the eastern coast of Japan. Just a few miles from Jin and his grandmother, the Okawa Elementary School was rocked by the earthquake, shattering windows and damaging the structure of the school. The teachers evacuated the children to the schoolyard, fearing that any aftershock would cause the school to collapse. Behind the school was an obvious location to take the children to safety, and one of the teachers, Junji Indo, suggested that everyone should take the children to the higher ground on the hill behind the school. This was a location that had a mushroom farm for science studies, and all children could easily ascend. Some children, hearing her words, ran toward the hill, which would easily provide clearance for any tsunami. But this young teacher was overruled, and the children were commanded to return. Two groups of people quickly formed. The first, including the mothers and grandmothers picking up their children from school, and the second group, including local villagers from the surrounding area. Some of the parents took their children and left in their cars for higher ground, but some were convinced by the teachers and local villagers that staying at the school was the best option. The parents that stayed at the school wanted to evacuate the children to the higher ground behind the school. However, the initial radio report stated that the tsunami was at most 6 meters. The school's deputy headmaster, Toshiya Ishizaka, believed that the tsunami could cause landslides and falling trees on the side of the hill, which posed a risk to the students. Also, there was a 7 to 8 meter high traffic island near their location, which should provide safety from the 6-meter wave. However, the report had been updated. According to the Education Board log, a parent told a 6-year teacher, Mr. Takashi, "The radio says that there's a 10-meter tsunami coming. Run up the hill." And she pointed to the hill. Mr. Takashi's response was, "Calm down, ma'am." As the two groups were arguing about what to do, several vans drove past shouting over their loudspeakers that the tsunami had arrived and everyone needed to get to higher ground. Mr. Ishizaka began leading the children to the traffic island and was nearly there when a giant wall of black water and debris came barreling toward them. The children in front froze, unable to process this new experience and the appropriate reaction. Some children with one of their teachers turned and ran toward the hill behind the school. 5th grade friends Tetsuya Tadano, Kohei Takahashi, and Daisuke Kono were among those that ran. They sprinted toward the hill as fast as they could as the tsunami behind them overtook the younger children. At the base of the hill, Daisuke fell. Tetsuya tried to pull him up, but the wave was approaching too quickly. He began to climb the hill, but it was too late. The water overtook him. His body was trapped in the debris, pinning his arms to his side and crushing him. He was underwater and couldn't move or breathe. Then, everything went black. Kohei had also been overtaken by the water, but was shot to the surface next to an open refrigerator that was floating on the surface of the water. He was able to climb in and stay afloat until it overturned from the churning wave and dumped him right on top of Tetsuya. Tetsuya shouted, "Help, I'm underneath you," and Kohei pulled Tetsuya up out of the mud. Tetsuya could barely make out what was happening in the wave below him, as his vision had been impaired by the helmet he was wearing gouging his eye. But Kohei could see it all. The teachers, the other students, the town, were all gone. In the end, Okawa Elementary School had 108 students and 11 teachers. After parents picked up some of the children after the earthquake, only 78 remained at the school. Of the 78 children and 11 teachers at the school when the tsunami arrived, 4 children and 1 teacher survived. At the same time that the tsunami was hitting the school, Jin and Sumi Abe were in the kitchen on the 2nd floor of their home, 1 kilometer from the ocean. They were cleaning up, recovering from the earthquake, when a sound of white noise covered with breaking and cracking wood filled the air. Without time to react, their home was extracted from its foundation and came collapsing down on top of them. They were thrown from their feet as furniture jostled around the room. The walls and boards broke all around them, and the house collapsed on top of them. When the house finally stopped moving and the water receded, Jin found himself in a small crawl space with debris all around him. The house had collapsed, trapping him in this small space, but he was alive and relatively uninjured. He was able to crawl around the broken boards in the darkness and found his grandma trapped under the couch. She couldn't move. He crawled around the tiny space looking for anything that he could find that would help their immediate situation. He found a blanket, a few towels, and the refrigerator, which was open and had yogurt inside. He knew that as long as he could keep his grandmother from freezing, they should be able to survive until help arrives. The tsunami destroyed parts of the eastern coast of Japan. Those hit hardest were the coastal towns in Iwate, Miyagi, and Fukushima prefectures. Sea walls had been erected to protect the towns from tsunamis, but they weren't high enough. 101 tsunami safe zones also were not high enough. In some cases, people that did evacuate fled to these safe zones, but were not safe and were swept away simply because this earthquake was the largest in Japan's recorded history, and the resulting tsunami was larger and more powerful than what the country was prepared for. At its peak height, the tsunami reached 9.3 meters or 30 feet above sea level in Soma, Fukushima. The algorithms used to estimate the tsunami's height had underestimated the height because they did not expect a tsunami of this magnitude. Simply put, Japan was not prepared for an earthquake and tsunami of this magnitude. While all of this was happening, in the rubble of Ishinomaki, 16-year-old Jin was just trying to keep his grandmother from freezing to death. She was trapped with a couch across her legs. Jin fed her yogurt and covered her with a blanket that he found under the rubble. He had his cell phone, but the power was out across a massive area. He couldn't call for help. During the day, Jin would crawl around the tiny space, moving broken boards that used to be their home, looking for a way out, trying in vain to find light shining through a hole large enough for him to fit through. But the collapsed house on top of them made it impossible to move boards and squeeze through. Akira Abe, Jin's father and Sumi's son, who had been at work when the tsunami hit, arrived at the boundary set up for the rescue effort and the temporary housings for the survivors. He was searching for his son and mother, but they were nowhere to be found. He told rescue workers where his house had been and that his other son had received a phone call from Jin after the earthquake. The rescuers were doing all they could, searching through mile after mile of homes demolished by the tsunami. At night, the temperature would plummet to below freezing. With no heat, Jin gave Sumi the blanket and covered himself with towels. They cuddled as closely as they could, using their body heat to keep warm. One day, Jin was searching for a way, pushing on boards and trying to squeeze through cracks when he heard voices. In the far distance, he could hear rescuers calling out for survivors. He called out and tried his hardest to get through to the surface, but couldn't. As quickly as the voices arrived, they faded, and he and Sumi were alone again. Day after day passed. The food was now almost gone, and Jin's body temperature was extremely low. He was hypothermic and deteriorating. On March 20th, 9 days after the earthquake and tsunami, Jin was in bad shape. He was working on tunneling his way through the debris as he had been doing day after day before. But this time, he finally was able to move some boards and saw a light. He crawled to the light and squeezed through the opening. After 9 days, he had finally dug his way out of the collapsed house. He heard voices and crawled over the other smashed houses until he was on top of a rubble pile. There were 4 rescuers searching in the area that found him. He could only whisper to them that his grandmother was still trapped in the house. The rescue team radioed for a helicopter and dug out his grandmother before it arrived. The helicopter lifted Jin and Sumi from the devastated area and transported them to the local hospital where they recovered. In 2021, official figures were posted for the Tohoku earthquake and tsunami. 19,759 deaths, 6,242 injured, and 2,553 people were still missing. Of the 19,759 total deaths, 378 were elementary, middle, and high school students. Since the disaster, coastal schools have updated their emergency plans, which many were found to be inadequate when dealing with earthquakes and tsunamis of this magnitude. Furthermore, many early warning systems were updated as the tsunami warning had severely underestimated the height of the tsunami in the original estimate. A more accurate model has been tested and is now active in the region. This is True Tragedies. Please like, leave comments, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.